Hello, Internet! Welcome to episode 211 of the Assorted Calibers podcast. The Second Amendment podcast is a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd. And with me tonight is the very lovely hostess, Erin Paulette. How are you doing?
I think I'm going to have to stop predicting things because I'm now 2 for 2 for being wrong. And I should probably just stop.
About the assault weapons ban?
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. But I'm just, okay, I need to stop. Clearly, I don't understand the world anymore. So, yeah, I'm shaking my head. Shaking my head about a lot of things. How are you doing, Weer'd?
I'm doing better.
I mean, I wasn't going to get into it, but now that you've front-loaded it like that,
I will just...
Yeah, you had a bad day yesterday.
I will say, I think I'm going to... The long story short is my daughter had a very, very rough day, and my wife got like an upset stomach in the middle of the night, and so like she was like up a million times and did not sleep well during the night. And I, for whatever reason, have been waking up absolutely exhausted and not able to go back to sleep. And so I was tired. My wife was tired and very cranky, and my daughter was hellaciously cranky. And there was a lot of drama in our house, and it pushed everyone to the breaking point. I have no action report on what caused all of this horror, but the one thing that seems to be the striking point is also the reason why my wife was feeling so poorly is we went to a birthday party the day before, and at that birthday party there was copious amounts of sugar and there was a bouncy house. And I think the combination, the too much sugar was what made my wife's stomach upset and made her sleep horrible. But I think the combination of copious amounts of sugar and a bouncy house was what turned my daughter into a monster the next day. I think she wore herself out and lit the candle at both ends. And essentially, I mean, little kids don't have cocaine yet, so they have sugar. I swear to God, like my daughter, when she was smaller, she could go days without having anything that had any sugar. But the moment she tasted any little bit of sugar in something, all she could think of was the next fix. Can I have more of this? Oh, but yeah, today was a much better day. But yeah, so how are you doing?
I already answered that.
Yeah, but you just said you're grumpy about the thing. But like, yeah, you're just grumpy about the thing. I understand. We have plenty of other stuff to talk about. Down with the small talk. But you started us off on a grim note. I'm gonna switch us around to a little bit more happiness. I gotta say, I was this was literally this morning as I was just reading through the news, just saying, all right, well, what should we talk about at the top of the show? And we got this first story, which is there was an email that was leaked from the Sacramento. I remember it being Sacramento.
Well, I mean, that is the capital of California.
Yeah, no, this may be statewide. I heard it as Sacramento police, though I think actually there is a news story that I did not link in the show notes. But there was a story of actually someone who was picked up in California, and they had, and it must have just been some sort of routine stop or something or other, because they were charged with possession of an illegal magazine in the state of California, and they literally let the guy go because they're like, this is the California's magazine ban was ruled to be constitutional by the is that the Ninth Circuit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, by the Ninth Circuit. And
Ninth Circus.
That is absolutely correct. They have been wrong just about every time when it comes to gun stuff. But So it was awaiting hearing by the Supreme Court because they were appealing it. And the Supreme Court sent it back to the Ninth Circuit because they're like, hey, check out this NYSERPA thing. Now do that.
Yeah, you're talking about Duncan versus Bonta.
Yes. Yep. Duncan versus Bonta. And so that is going back and to the Ninth Circuit with the instructions for them to look historically and see if there is any historical precedent within the law that would show that at the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment, that such restrictions might be reasonable. And they're not going to find any. So, needless to say, actually, my dad just called me the other day and said that a drum mag showed up at his door in Maine. And it will stay there in it will stay there in Maine until the laws change here in Massachusetts. But let's just say I'm banking on it.
So basically, you ordered it, but had it sent there for safekeeping.
Correct. I think guarantee that somebody else will not. They won't necessarily. They wouldn't have shipped it there to Massachusetts anyway. Or at least I assumed. Like, I know I at one point was on Midway US. I know it was Midway USA, and they had a sale on CZ82 mags. And honestly, I have no idea when CZs. They might have made much later, but the 82 specifically, the military pistol, but 9x18. It's a curio relic gun. I've got one. They're absolutely wonderful pistols. Like, if you can get your hands on a CZ82 or a CZ83, I highly recommend it. But yeah, I saw a whole bunch of those magazines, and they're 12 round magazines. And I saw that they were having a huge sale on them. And I'm like, awesome. I'm going to buy a whole bunch. And they immediately said, oh no, we don't ship those to Massachusetts. I'm like, but aren't they all pre-banned? Whatever. But they wouldn't send them to me.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of companies who, when it comes to like Hawaii, New York, Massachusetts, it's just, no, we don't ship there. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I've actually encountered a lot of difficulty getting handguns shipped into Massachusetts with my CNR. They just won't send it to a CNR FFL, and I'm like, really? Last I checked, there's no law. I'm still not aware of any law that says that I can't take possession of a handgun through my FFL. But whatevs.
It's probably a case of it's just easier to do a blanket ban than to have someone determine, can we do this, can we not? Yes. What are the legal side effects if we break the law? So it's just, it's easier. Yes. Yep. And I'm not saying I agree. I'm just saying I understand.
Oh, I mean, I totally understand. That's the whole reason why we've got the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, is strictly because, hey, even if you don't lose, you still lose. So therefore, we got to get them to stop doing this. But yeah, so California right now is not screwing with people with because they have a large capacity. Well, it's any large capacity magazine in California. They don't have a pre-ban or post-ban bit. So that's awesome. Like, I'm glad that they're not. Number one, I'm glad the cops aren't wasting their time with such stuff, because if someone has just a magazine, who cares? And so that's going through. I've got another story right here. A federal judge has granted a temporary restraining order against some of the new gun ordinances passed by the town of Superior in Colorado last month. Essentially, so I guess Superior, Colorado has issued an assault weapons ban, and they are saying, yeah, you guys can't enforce that, because also there is, let's see, do they have the court case? But there's also a court case against Maryland's assault weapons ban that has been sent back for review. And
one thing I want to touch on while you look things up is that this new ordinance by Superior. So the article lists 3 points. And so it's a ban on assault weapons and large capacity magazines and rapid fire trigger activators. And raises the age to purchase firearms. Second, it prohibits open carry firearms in public places. But the third one, this is the point that I want to make. Prohibiting the sale or possession of illegal weapons. let's just let that settle for a moment. They're already illegal, and so they're going to prohibit selling or owning something which is already illegal. They're going to make it doubly illegal? Illegaler? It just strikes me as silly.
Oh, so the case is, I had to look it up at a different one. It's not listed on that. It's Bianchi versus Frosch. And so, that is challenging Maryland's assault weapons ban, which I am also watching very, very closely because at least how it's written, certainly not how it's enforced in Massachusetts. It is the same as the Massachusetts assault weapons ban. And so, yeah, anybody who's dealing with such nonsense. Plus, as I said, we'll be talking about federal assault weapons bans coming up.
But hey, speaking of Maryland, in one of the articles you linked for an entirely different topic, right at the very bottom, it says that in Maryland, between June 23rd and July 11th, according to the state police, applications for concealed carry permits increased 773% over the past year. And of course, this is because of Bruin. But wow. Good for you, Marylanders.
Yeah, so this is what Aaron is talking about is literally, I honestly speaking, I messed up. I don't know what happened. I think I must have searched for it. It used to be if I typed in THE into my browser, it would bring me right to the reload. But it started auto completing it to the trace again, which, but I'm glad I accidentally clicked over because their opening newsletter is just grim. It's just tears in the old beer. So yeah. The trace is tracking the effects of the SCOTUS gun ruling. That's just got a state-by-state breakdown, which is actually pretty darn good. Like I highly recommend anyone who wants a good happy read. That's a good one to click on. It's even better knowing that it's written from an anti-gun source like Michael Bloomberg's The Trace. Let's see. There were at least 12 mass shootings over the weekend. Funny, we're not hearing about them. And let's see. Oh, they've got the House passed a ban on assault weapons bill. I will just read the money line since we'll be talking about this again later. But this, according to the anti-gun paper funded by Michael Bloomberg, The Trace, but the bill will largely serve as a messaging bill, as it stands virtually no chance of passing the evenly divided Senate. Boy, that had to hurt to write. Let's see a little bit, putting New York City's pandemic shooting surge in context. I actually linked the article. This is actually from Bloomberg.com, which just adds even more. And I don't really need to dive into too much. It's talking about the fact that there's a huge rise of shooting in New York over the last year. And they're pointing out the fact that it's still not as bad as it was. And compared
to the 1970s, it's so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. we were laughing about, like, I think it's the very first ACP film track was Mazes and Monsters. And there's a very, very young Tom Hanks wandering through the streets of New York, dazed and confused, and it's just super dark and dirty and scary. And it's one of those like, oh yeah, this is how New York used to be viewed. We really don't see a lot of the Escape from New York sort of feel anymore these days, though they're working on it. But either way, the interesting thing is that New York has got piles and piles of gun laws, and they are really just thumbing their nose at the Supreme Court in violation of it. And yet still they have to explain away their shootings. If gun laws worked, wouldn't they just be like, hey, Supreme Court, screw you, this works. We're not going to risk ourselves. Look, we're the safest place in the universe. No, you're not. That'd be places like Maine, where I'm from.
Interestingly enough, in this very article, they mention that there is an overall crime and violence spike in the world, and they specifically single out London. In London, where gun violence is rarer than in the US because it's so hard to get a gun, more teenagers were killed last year than at any point in the last 18. So, yeah, those gun laws really aren't keeping people safe from being murdered now, are they?
But they've also got lots of knife laws, which also aren't working because all those kids are being stabbed.
Well, the very next line in that article, they died from stabbings, arson, and the very vague other types of violence.
We need common sense arson laws, Aaron. Just like the laws against selling illegal guns. We need to say it's illegal to burn stuff down. It's illegal to arson. Arson being defined as the crime of burning stuff down.
Well, clearly what we need are common sense background checks when you're buying matches or a lighter or any other flame projector.
Such as Thomas the Tank Engine flatware for your kids.
I mean, I see where you're going with that, but I was talking about lighters, and then you suddenly throw in knives.
I want to make fun of England because that's literally it. There's that picture.
Yeah.
I've posted a previous show note. I tried to dig it up the other day and I wasn't able to find it as easily, but literally it was a Thomas the Tank Engine flatware set for a child. So the super duper rounded knife and the like rounded fork and the little spoon with all the little plastic choo-choo trains on the handle sides of them, and a sign that says you need to be at least 18 to buy this. You must present ID. Mm-hmm. It's working, England. You're doing great. All right, so this next story, Aaron, you presented this like right underneath the wire, and I'm like, oh, that's going in.
Yeah, I didn't think you were going to include it. It was more a case of this is interesting.
Yeah, we already talked about it in the pre-show, but let's dive into this.
All right, so Rolling Stone magazine, which is really all you need to know in terms of their politics, is whining that Georgia's gun laws are forcing Atlanta's Midtown Music Festival to cancel this year. And so the TLDR of this is that this event takes place in Piedmont Park, which is a public space, and Georgia's laws say that you can carry in this public space, and that a short-term tenant, like the concert, can't enforce a firearms ban. And many, if not most, of the artists have in their contracts riders which basically state, no, you can't have guns, I guess because they're worried they'll be shot at or something. And so because the concert can't search people and ban the guns, the concert is just canceling this year.
Mm-hmm. Which will be missed by many people my age, because let's just point out, the headliners are Jack White, Future, My Chemical Romance, and Fall Out Boy. Have any of these bands been relevant in the last 20 years?
I mean, okay, I've never heard of Future.
I haven't either.
But I have heard of those other three, and yeah, I remember listening to them in my 20s and 30s. So
I remember in the early 2000s, everybody, like every music magazine and pop culture magazine that I read, talked about like how amazing Jack White was and what an amazing group the White Stripes were. And so I listened to them and went, what? And then just suddenly they were just gone. Meg and Jack broke up, and then Jack did a solo career and then suffered the curse of Bond, where he and Alicia Keys did the No Time to Die. No, not No Time to Die. It was another way to die, I think was the song title, but it was for Quantum of Solace. And then both of them were never heard of again. May I add, Adele beat the curse. It's stated that there's a curse that if you perform the lead single to the lead track to a James Bond movie, your career will be over. And that has been mostly true for just about all of the artists that have done James Bond stuff. Some of them were like Tina Turner doing GoldenEye. She was really kind of on the backside of her career. Not that I like to say that for someone as talented as Tina Turner, but she was already at like at the tail end of her second wave, that she was super popular in the 70s with Ike and Tina. And then after their divorce, she came back even better than ever with her 80s stuff, and, with What's Love Got to Do with It and that sort of stuff. And then she kind of faded away again, but then came back for GoldenEye, an absolutely astounding song. But
I believe that Duran Duran, who did A View to a Kill, it didn't kill their careers.
Oh yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
I mean, it's pretty close towards the backside, but I don't know. Yeah, I know Aha just disappeared after Living Daylights, but Madonna was well past her sell-by date as well. But Jack White and Alicia Keys were both pretty hot stuff when Quantum of Solace came out, and then haven't really heard much from them since. But either way,
what about? And this is not a rhetorical question. I truly don't know. What about Chris Cornell? Because I really loved "You Know My Name" from Casino Royale.
Yeah. I don't know how much. I mean, I know he was done with Soundgarden when that came out. I don't know much about his solo career, and then he did pass away a few years ago of a drug overdose. So there was that. So I don't know. Depends on. I mean, you would argue the death by misadventure could be argued as part of the curse.
Okay.
But again, Adele did Skyfall, and what was it, last year or 2 years? It was last year she came out with a new album, and I believe it's gone platinum. It's selling quite well, and it's a good album. I heard she had a deal with Spotify that you couldn't listen to it out of order, and I've got to say, as someone who takes a lot of interest in the track order of an album, I like that.
Okay, then. Well, I mean, I have nothing to contribute because, to the best of my knowledge, I have not heard a single Adele song, and this is not, deliberate. It's just her musical path and mine have not intersected.
Yeah, I could see that. She's not for everyone, but she's got an amazing voice.
Is it worth seeking out one of her songs? Oh, okay. I shall rephrase. Weer'd, you have one song with which to sell me on Adele. What song do I listen to?
My personal favorite is "Rollin' in the Deep."
Okay.
That is my personal favorite. It's a little bit of an older one, and give that a listen. If that doesn't do it for you, I think it's safe to say that it's not for you.
Okay, great. That's all I wanted.
Cool. But yeah, so this music festival, they're canceling. I mean, I get it because of the riders. That makes a little bit more sense than the venue itself canceling. It's just their lack of trade. But it's one of those. I gotta wonder, how bad could it be? It's you already have the various the gangster rap type people that they invite a certain level of lawlessness there, and guns or no guns, there's guns are going to show up, and that happens. But even then, we hear about it, but it's not insanely common, and it's certainly not to say, oh yeah, all rap concerts are going to be just bloodbaths. No, not even remotely. And in this case, these, a bunch of, late 90s and early 2000s, perennials. I don't think you got to worry about a bunch of 40 somethings sitting around, 40 and 50 somethings sitting around listening to Jack White shooting up the place. All right. Well, next up is this one was just hilarious. Did you by chance read this, a Washington Post opinion article?
I try to read everything you link. I read most of it. Past a certain point, it was all I heard was wah, 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 wah. But yeah, there was a lot of sour grapes whining, and again, Heavy from Team Fortress, cry some more, ha ha ha.
Cry some more. Wah, wah.
This one has this one is mostly a vanity piece for Ryan Busse of he did his, I think he called it Gunfight. Yes. But
gear for your daily gunfight.
no, well, that's something different. That's a SHOT Show banner that he was talking about. I'm trying to remember what his actual book is. It's not listed there. I will just say, without naming the person that I know that has read the book, but they essentially told me don't bother. Yeah, but he is, of course, he used to be a sales rep for Kimber. And sales rep from Kimber back when they had put all the terrible MIM parts in the guns, so you would spend $900 to $1,200 on a 1911 pistol, and it wouldn't work. And a lot of the 1911s, all they do is jam. Kimber has a lot to do with that stereotype. Let's just say. I'll say my Smith & Wessons run really well. But yeah, so Ryan, he spoke in front of Congress that we will be talking about that also in a little bit. But and I have the link to the highlight reel from his testimony. Unfortunately, I will warn you, it is one of those YouTube TikTok competition things where it like only plays in portrait mode and doesn't show you like the timer or let you like fast forward or scroll. It just kind of plays it in a loop. And it's really, really annoying because one, Ryan doesn't appear to breathe because he doesn't need to, I guess, but there's no breath taken during the whole thing. And whoever edited it didn't think that it might be a good idea to put something on either end. So it just kind of just loops in just this breathless loop of nonsense. But yeah, it's a lot of sour grapes. And I've done an audio Fisk on Ryan Busse before. And, but yeah, he really likes his like straw man arguments. I love that he's a left-wing guy. He is he is a gun owner, but it appears in every ounce that he is the very, very token example of an Elmer Fudd. He's
a butter.
Yeah, he likes his single stack 45 handguns, and he likes his bolt action hunting rifles and upland bird shotguns because he's a hunter and a sportsman. And I probably, even though Kimber is well known for making 1911s targeted for carry, bet you that he doesn't have any of those.
So for our listeners who don't know what I meant, when I say he's a butter, I mean I'm a gun owner, but that's a butter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. And so he's talking about like the it's the kind of, let's see what it will. That's not a direct quote of his, but they do a lot of great. As Busse testified, the industry markets AR-15s by telling people they could use what the special forces guy used, and by getting guns featured in movies and in first-person shooter games. The industry condones frightening market and openly partners with domestic terror organizations like the Boogaloo Boys, a group that hopes for race wars and wears Hawaiian shirts. Well, first up, race wars. I don't remember any of the Boogaloo Boy stuff that I have seen having any racial context whatsoever. But also,
okay, this is me scoffing skeptically at the notion that there is any sort of organization among, boog aficionados. A lot of it is just people talking crap.
And I've got to say, in the world of people saying Black Lives Matter and Antifa are kind of like Schrodinger's groups in the fact that they both exist and don't exist because they are very grassroots and very and very spontaneous in their existence. We can still point to events and bad things that have happened under the banner of either Black Lives Matter or Antifa. And that is making no specific judgment calls about the groups themselves. Because again, I can't say that head leadership of both of those groups, which I couldn't even tell if there is any, have condoned such behavior. But I will also note that even less structured is the quote unquote Boogaloo Boys, which is really just more of a meme than anything else. And a cosplay. Let's be honest. People show up at rallies with plate carriers over Hawaiian shirts just because it's hilarious. And yeah, and they have done absolutely nothing but protest and be hilarious. But Ryan Busse, who has no part of any of this, is saying it because, yeah, he knows all about this stuff.
Well, I do want to point out that this Washington Post column is not written by Ryan Busse. It quotes him, but it's written by someone else. You're using a lot of second-person pronouns, and people might get confused as to who you're talking about.
Yes, this article was written by Paul Walderman, but he is really kind of directly interviewing Busse as the token expert, which the anti-gun groups love to have I'm a gun owner, but because they can suddenly say, no one wants to see, they don't want to take all your guns because this guy's still going to keep his guns. Well, first up, are you sure? Because the whole, like, yeah, the polyphemus thing of I like you, I'll eat you last.
But yet there's a whole lot of breathless fear-mongering in this article. And so there's so obviously an agenda here. It's hard for me to keep a straight face. I mean, okay, here's a quote, and I can't take it seriously, so I'm going to do it in one of my voices. And honestly, this sounds so lurid. I'm going to do this in my inner world voice. All this adds up to an industry that quite consciously markets its products not as a way to responsibly defend your home, but as an instrument of murder and mayhem. I mean, they're selling AR-15s. They aren't even select fire.
Also interesting that there's marketing towards murder and mayhem, but yet there's not a picture of that. The only picture is like a stock picture of clearly a California gun shop, because it's all these ARs with the shark fin pistol grip and flush fit box magazines. And so, yeah, that's all they had. You would think the shoot up your school, kids, use a Bushmaster would be like, that'd be prime. We'd be seeing that on the front page of every anti-gun paper.
There's another point in the article that I'm not going to say I stopped reading, but it was a case of, okay, I'm kind of done now and I'm just going to skim it. And he talks about the Heller case. And he says, and I quote, the 2008 case that created an individual right
that was exact
to
point
own
I was
guns.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, is oh my goodness, you went there. The 2008 case that is citing the Second Amendment is creating an individual right to own guns, which, first up, can we just point out the fact that collective rights has only been a statement that was created by the anti-gunners, as far as I know, unless somebody else has heard it used anywhere else. But there's no collective First Amendment right or Fourth Amendment right or Fifth Amendment right or any of the other, you really can't have a collective right, because, like, I'll point out, like, the people that say, you want to run around with a machine gun, join the army. You want to carry a weapon of war, join the army. Don't go buy one of those AR-15s. Well, except for if I joined the army, I would be sidelining my Second Amendment rights, as well as my First Amendment rights and all that. You can't speak ill of the president or your chain of command while you're in uniform. There's many stuff that you cannot do while you are in uniform for the military. And another thing that you can't do is just grab a gun. You have to be given, I don't know what the proper order is, but essentially, you have the Fort Hood shooting where soldiers were just picked off one at a time by a dude with a pistol. And the reason was because it's Fort Hood. We are not at war, so therefore they were not authorized to carry guns. And this guy was shot by a police officer who was a civilian police officer who was directing traffic and had her sidearm on her.
I'm honestly surprised the gate guards allowed her in.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how that works, but yeah, clearly they did, and thank goodness they did.
Well, yes, but yeah, on military bases. Well, okay, I should clarify. On military bases stateside, the only people that are allowed to carry arms are MPs. Mm-hmm. You know, my point being is that if you're on a base like in Afghanistan, you know, that's completely different because you're in a war zone. But yeah, if you are, you know, in a friendly country, you know, not in war, then yeah, it's only the military police that have guns. You can have one in your home, and you know, you can probably take one to the range, but it's very restrictive.
Yeah, and I don't know, since your father is an actual Vietnam vet, but that was one thing that I heard about, and I've heard a lot more from internet story people and certainly from people who work behind gun store counters. The story of the person refusing to give up their M14 when they were coming around and issuing M16s in Vietnam. And yeah, and it's one of those things of yeah, sure you did. I'm not going to get that plastic gun. It's made by Mattel.
I mean, I'm sure they said no. They were probably forced to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. But yes, according to my father, he really hated the cheap plastic gun, and it didn't work, and all these other things. And yes, he much preferred the M14 because it had a manly cartridge to knock you down and things like that. But I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I'm going to tell the story, and if it's not relevant, you can put it on blooper reel. So I don't know for a fact this is real. This is one of those, I haven't heard it so much that I think that I'm certain it's an urban legend. It might very well be, but it's got enough of a ring of truth that I find it highly plausible. And admittedly, I haven't spent a lot of time digging into it. But as the story goes, there was a soldier in Vietnam who was concerned about the situation at home because this was, the time of a lot of internal strife and the civil rights movement. And he was worried, I guess, about the possibility of a race war, things like that. So what happened was he reported his M16 lost on a mission, but he didn't lose it. He stashed it. Then he disassembled it and started sending it home piece by piece to his wife. No, I don't know how he planned to handle the barrel, the stock, the things like that. But as the story goes, all right, the wife started receiving these things, and she didn't know what they were. And after a certain amount of time, just curiosity got the best of her. And of course, her husband wouldn't tell her what it was. It's, one of those, don't worry your pretty little head over it, honey. I'll explain later when I'm home. And what she did, because this was in the 60s, before the internet, she asked her mail carrier, her mailman, do you know what this is? My husband's sending me these parts. And as it turns out, the mailman was a former military man. I believe he had served in Vietnam, as the story goes. And he recognizes it as like, that's part of an M16. And I don't know what he told the wife, but he alerted the postal authorities as to this, and they alerted the military. They didn't do anything for a good long time. They let the man serve out his entire tour in Vietnam, and by that time, I believe he had shipped most, if not all, of the rifle. Maybe he was going to smuggle the big pieces out with him. I don't know. But they wait until he gets home. Oh, we see that you've been sending home an M16 that you stole from the army. You're now under arrest. And in certain versions of the story, the joke is, well, you can go to jail, or you can go back to Vietnam for another tour.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could. You always hear about like I've heard about like people with various military arms from World War II that have been cut in certain locations, and they call them the duffel bag cut, so that the rifle is long enough to fit into a standard GI duffel bag. And I would imagine that the barrel at any one single part of an M16 would fit in a duffel bag.
Oh, definitely. It's just a matter of, would they be inspected or not? I don't know either.
I suspect that the story is apocryphal, so, but doesn't make it any less amusing.
Well, we all had a good time hearing it, and that's what's important.
Yes. And so I will close out this story, this Washington Post story, with actually what got a friend of the show to send this to me, which he thought was really great, was in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin that struck down laws restricting people carrying guns outside the home. Justice Clarence Thomas's majority opinion mentioned the phrase common use 5 separate times. This is how the facts on the ground now work. The gun industry has made the AR-15 common. Therefore, no matter how many children are slaughtered with it, that means it must enjoy constitutional protection. Oh, gotta love that little fear-mongering twist at the end. But yeah, it's one of those that's super common use. And also, can't talk about how many people defend themselves with these guns. Stephen Williford had an AR-15, and countless people have defended themselves from home invasions and various stuff with AR-15s. So yeah, they are in common use. So tough luck, guys. So I think it's time to lead us into the discussion of the assault weapons ban, and it has been voted on and it passed the House. And before the vote, the House Oversight Committee questioned the CEOs of several gun companies. And it was as bad as you think. So I did a weird audio Fisk on it. So the House Oversight Committee had a hearing where several of the CEOs of major U.S. gun makers were called to testify. It was just as politically charged and nonsensical as you'd think. In short, it's fit for a weird audio Fisk. I'll start with some questions from Representative Katie Porter of California.
This is my cell phone. Mr. Kelly, it scans my fingerprint each time I go to unlock it. Is this a weapon?
No, ma'am.
Can this fire bullets that shred people's vital organs? This phone?
No, Congresswoman, it can't.
Then why should this device require more steps to operate than your company's firearms, which have been used in accidental shootings, mass shootings, and homicides?
Wait, what? Well, a cell phone can be a weapon. Certainly hacking and malware can harm a person, though maybe not physically. Of course, it could be used as an impact weapon. What's really silly is she immediately goes off the rails claiming it's required to have biometrics on a phone. No, it isn't. Now, I use a Samsung phone and it uses a fingerprint scanner. My wife uses an Apple phone. I know, gross. And it uses the face biometrics. But those features are just optional. We could just shut them off and run them without it, or use simple password protection. Also notice she says shred vital organs and talks about accidental shootings, mass shootings, and homicides, not self-defense. Because anti-gunners hate self-defense and can't even speak its name.
These fingerprint scanners are offered in some firearms. Some manufacturers sell this, and they work. Your company and Mr. Daniels' company chooses not to. Let me demonstrate again how long this takes. It's instant. It's instant when I pick up my phone.
So first up, there is currently 0 firearms that come with a biometric lock of any kind. The only firearm currently available on the commercial market that is considered a smart gun is the Armatix IP1. The Armatix uses RFID technology with a wristwatch to unlock the gun. This is essentially the same as a basic lock and key, but rather than using simple and reliable mechanical technology that's centuries old and thoroughly debugged, it uses complex and unreliable technology that requires computers and batteries in both the watch and the gun. Furthermore, I have a Wired article where a hacker came up with all sorts of high-tech hacks for both unlocking a locked IP1, but also jamming the gun so it won't even work when the authorized user deploys it. Even worse, the hacker was able to put some simple rare earth magnets against the frame of the gun and bypass the electrical lock entirely. Further, the IP1 is a simple .22 caliber pistol, much like many of the basic .22 pistols available on the market for around $300. Except this gun and the watch cost over $1,500. All for a gun that operates like my Smith & Wesson 617 revolver that comes with an integral key lock. And yes, the fingerprint lock on a phone is nearly instantaneous. But that is when it works. If my hands are dirty or my reader is dirty, it simply doesn't work until it's cleaned off. Also, it doesn't work if my hands are wet. So don't expect to deploy a fingerprint lock gun in the rain. Cuts and scratches, dry skin, and burns also render my fingerprint unreadable by the device. All those are fine for a telephone that doesn't even need to be unlocked to take or make a call, but unacceptable for a life-saving tool. Also, I must note that in a post-COVID-19 world, the Apple Face ID doesn't work if you're wearing a mask. Furthermore, if you're wearing a hat and sunglasses, the Face ID also may not work. Now we move on to Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney, who's just as bad.
How many more American children need to die before your company will stop selling assault weapons to civilians and children, the weapon of choice in most mass murders in our country?
Why are you asking a gun CEO? They are making a legal product and selling it in full accordance to the laws, of which there are many. Really, this question is completely pointless, as if they ban the guns, then they won't be able to choose to sell them. At the time of our recording, the House has passed the 2021 assault weapons ban, a bill so popular it didn't even get voted on in the year that it was presented, and passed the House by a razor-thin margin of 217 to 213. And I will note that 5 Democrats voted against it. It wouldn't have even passed if it wasn't for 2 Republicans. Chris Jacob from New York, who is retiring, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, who is the only Republican endorsed by the Giffords anti-gun corporate lobby. Its chance of passing in the Senate are grim, and chances of passing constitutional scrutiny is slim. And even this bill won't ban guns already in public possession. So that leaves the anti-gunners with grandstanding as their best option. Marty Daniel of Daniel Defense gives his answer.
Congresswoman Maloney, I believe that these murders are local problems that have to be solved locally. I believe that
okay. My time is limited, and I have to go to the next question.
This is a great example of arguing in bad faith. She asks a question and doesn't even care enough about the answer to allow Mr. Daniel to finish his answer. Let's see what was so fucking important that she needs to stop him from asking the question she asked in the first place.
Mr. Killoy, how about you? Is there any number of shootings in schools and churches and synagogues that would convince you to stop selling weapons of war to civilians?
So she interrupted Mr. Daniel to ask the same question to the CEO of Ruger Firearms. You think she cares about what he has to say either?
Respectfully, Congresswoman, I don't consider the modern sporting rifles today that my company produces to be weapons of war.
He's right. They aren't weapons of war. Many of the U.S. companies that make civilian AR-15s also made M4 carbines for the military, and those guns had full auto capabilities. Further, Sig Sauer is making the M5 carbine for the military, also a full auto firearm. All of these are illegal to sell to civilians. So companies like Colt, FN USA, Sig Sauer, and Remington do make weapons of war, but cannot and do not sell them to civilians. And firearms that are sold on the commercial market are legal for civilian sale.
You ask what the industry has done and what our company has done and can do. One of the things you referenced was the Sutherland Springs situation. In that case, the evil person who perpetrated those crimes and committed those murders was allowed to buy a firearm that, frankly, he should not have been allowed to do.
Reclaiming my time.
And as soon as he points out how much gun companies are concerned about preventing mass murder and supporting and passing laws that actually do something rather than political grandstanding, she stops him again because she never cared about his answer in the first place.
It seems to me that if a company really cared that its products were being used to kill scores of Americans, it would stop selling them. But of course, the gun industry won't do that because they're making lots and lots of money from these weapons. As shown in the chart behind me, over the last 10 years, Daniel Defense collected more than $500 million in revenue selling AR-15 style assault weapons, the weapon of choice in too many mass shootings. Ruger also made over $500 million on these weapons, and Smith & Wesson made more than $600 million. That is the very definition of putting profits over people.
Except the companies are selling weapons that have been proven by the CDC, among many others, to have saved lives. Meanwhile, many of the spree killings she's grandstanding about were in gun-free zones. And I'll note that Representative Maloney is from New York, a state that both has a violent crime problem, enough gun control laws that the federal court keeps telling them to knock it off, and are now working to create more gun-free zones to keep people from defending themselves. If anti-gunners actually cared about lives, they would do something different. But they don't. They just care about banning guns. Those are your anti-gun talking points and a few rebuttals to combat them.
So listening to that horror show, really the thing that popped into my mind was, how dare companies sell items that people want? How dare they make a profit?
Mm-hmm. And I'll bring this up, but Aaron, we talked about it before the show. You were mentioning the fact that I said in the Fisk about how they needed those two Republicans to pass the bill, and you're like, how does that work? Because it passed by, what was it, four votes.
Yeah, and I actually had it explained to me, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and so all I told you is I have heard several people say that those two Republican votes were absolutely necessary given the number of Democrat defectors, and so that they were key votes that were going through. And again, one thing that everyone seems to be missing is that these two guys, I looked them up. One of them I knew by name. The guy from New York is retiring, but the guy from Pennsylvania, I'm like, what's his story? Only Republican endorsed by Giffords. So he's clearly not concerned. And so, yeah, but I heard the two biggest names that I've heard that I was quoting from that are Stephen Kotowski of the Reload and Colleen Noir of Colleen Noir. He needs no introduction. And so I trust them. So you got an explanation?
Yes. And it comes down to me no math good. So it looked like it passed. Well, okay, it did pass by 4 votes, 217 votes for, 213 against. And so, all right, you take away those 2 Republicans, and then it's 215 versus 213.
Oh,
and
I did the math too. Shit, I missed it.
So what Colleen Noir and others are arguing, and they kind of leave out the fact that, okay, if the Republicans had abstained, it still would have passed. Mm-hmm. But they're basically arguing if the Republicans had voted against the bill, like everyone else in the party, it would have been a dead heat 215 to 215, and you need a majority in order to win, and so it wouldn't have passed. That's what they're saying.
Plus, there was 1 Republican abstention, and so, in theory, they could have called the person. I actually watched the vote go down live, and most of the people, including Carolyn Maloney herself, was not on the floor at the time and was voting through proxy. Somebody showed up, was addressed, and stated that I am voting on behalf of X, and their vote is yay. And so,
well, let's not ignore the fact that the Democrats played some dirty pool here. It's absolutely legal in terms of parliamentary procedure, but ethically, I find it very distasteful. So, like we reported last week, the DNC told everyone that they were going to hold off until after the adjournment. You know, they were tabling it for now. They'd get back to it later, and we all bought it, and that was disinformation. What they did was the equivalent of, okay, it's 4:59 on Friday. Most people have already left for the weekend. Quick, let's call a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone that they wanted to vote for this bill already knew about it and was sticking around. But the ones who weren't going to vote for it, they just let them leave. And so there was a, like you said, people had to use proxies. People had to vote over telephone. It was very much a scramble of, they're doing what? Dang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll say also, let's woe is me to poor Weer'd, is that I had written up the entire script for this Fisk. And just as I was sitting down to record it, I realized that they were talking, they had called for a vote. I was going to record it that morning, and I went, oh God, I got to see how this goes. And then I got to rewrite the section where I talk about the assault weapons ban not going through. And so, yes, it has passed. I noted in the trace that even the trace says that its chance of passing the Senate is very, very slim. Of course, I also note I referenced Collier Noir, and Collier Noir pointed out the fact that a whole bunch of Republicans voted for the Safers Community Act. And so, in theory, if all of those people that voted for that also voted for the assault weapons ban, that it has a chance of passing. But I think like this bill literally takes people's guns away. It has a grandfather clause in it, but I just put some scare quotes up there for that no one can see. But the grandfather clause says that, yes, when this bill goes through, the guns that you have that are quote unquote assault weapons will remain legal because they were owned before the law passed, except that you are not allowed to transfer that firearm. So when you die, that gun, it might go into the hands could go into the hands of an SOT. I'm not really exactly sure how the rules work for that, but essentially you could not will it to your family. You could not do that. Could not sell it to anybody else. You know, people who are in banned states like Massachusetts, you may have a pre-ban AR-15 and that's yours. And you probably weren't the first owner of it. Somebody else bought it. And then when they were done, they traded to you. And because it was made before 1994, even though it's got the evil features in Massachusetts, that's a legal gun. And that's no longer the case. That is your gun and it will only be your gun. And when you die, it will need to go away. So they are not taking your guns away, but they are taking your children's gun away. Mm-hmm. And so I think this will be much more grave, and especially it's got magazine bans and it's got gun bans and the bipartisan, the Safer Communities Act. As awful as it was, they did strip off all of the gun stuff directly. They kept the red flag law stuff and the straw buyer and that sort of stuff, which is gun adjacent, but it does not specifically address guns. And they pulled all of the gun related stuff off of that and sidelined it. So I think I'm siding with the trace on the fact that I don't think this is going to go very far, especially since we had 5 Democrats parting ways with their party and voting against this. And that's for a bill that many people have speculated won't pass. And if a gun's voted on in the House, yes, us gun nuts, we're going to know whose names, who said that and what's going on. And we're paying attention to such things. But for the average Joe, unless it turns into a law, who cares? And so I think once it gets to the Senate and the people that vote on that, if they vote to pass it, and of course Biden will sign it if he gets it, the blood will be directly on their hands, and that will be something very difficult to explain to the voters when it comes time to defend their seat.
I mean, normally I would agree with you, but I've been wrong twice in a row now, and not that I want to be right, not that this brings me any comfort, but even Collier Noir, he's looking at the Senate, and he's saying, yeah, most people think it won't pass the Senate, but I don't know, man. I didn't think we'd get this far.
Yep.
And so, yeah, at this point, I have to be fatalistic because, okay, If I assume the worst and then the opposite happens because that's just my luck, we win. Yay! That's fantastic. But if I assume the worst and the worst happens, then I'm at least prepared for it. So at this point, I'm just going to be operating on the assumption that this assault weapon ban 2.0 is going to happen. And I so desperately want to be wrong.
Yep. Well, we also have the added insurance that we've got that assault weapons ban case that is that is going forward, and even if the appeals court does not choose to remand their decision, it could always go back to the Supreme Court. So it's not the end of the line, no matter what, even if it does pass. But
yeah, okay. And it's highly unlikely in a post-Bruin world that this will survive. But the problem is, in the time between the law is enacted and when it reaches the Supreme Court to be struck down, there's going to be lives ruined and businesses destroyed and, family heirlooms confiscated. The damage will be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, better safe than sorry if you contact your senators, especially if you are in a blue state or a purple state, especially if you're a rural Democrat. If you have got someone who is in a gun-owning district or you're in a gun-friendly state that happens to have Democrats, contact them and let them know that this law is crap. This is not good stuff. It's likely going to be ruled unconstitutional, even if it does pass, and tell them to be on the right side of history.
All right, so let's pivot from the right side of history to, as David puts it, oops, wrong hole.
Hi, and welcome to Gun Lovers and Other Strangers. Back in episodes 184 and 185, I talked about how certain chamberings could fire multiple different cartridges safely. I stressed that this is not always the case and care must be taken to stay on the safe side of cartridge combinations. So in this segment, I'd like to share some stories where that didn't happen. Recently, a friend of the show relayed something he observed while at the range. A few benches over, some guys were shooting a very nice Weatherby rifle. As is common on the gun range, he went over to chat. While there, he noticed their ejected brass looked odd. After a short conversation, he found out that while the rifle was chambered in .300 Weatherby Magnum, they were firing .300 Winchester Magnum. Because, as they told him, .300 Winchester Magnum was cheaper and easier to find, and it worked just fine in their rifle. With their permission, he collected a couple of pieces of fired brass. Later, not only did he share this story with me, he sent me one of those fired cases along with both .300 Weatherby Magnum and .300 Winchester Magnum cases that had been fired in the correct rifles. These three cases are pictured in the file named Wrong Chambering 01. From left to right, the cases shown in the picture are .300 Winchester Magnum, .300 Winchester Magnum fired in a .300 Weatherby Magnum, and .300 Weatherby Magnum. As can be seen, the cartridge fired in the wrong chamber has had its shoulder pushed forward, leaving a very short neck. If done intentionally, this is called fire forming and is part of the cartridge conversion process. In this case, it was done out of false economy. While this combination is generally not especially dangerous, it will cause a buildup of carbon and other combustion residue at the end of the chamber. If the correct ammunition is fired without a thorough cleaning, this ring of buildup can cause problems with extraction. If left in place, it's possible it can also cause damage to the neck of the chamber. Anyone who has experienced firing some rounds of .357 Magnum after a few cylinders of .38 Special is familiar with this experience. The second image is more visually impressive. The three cases, again left to right, are .308 Winchester, .308 Winchester fired in a .30-06 chamber, and .30-06. This one I did myself. Now, in my cartridge collection, I do have an example of this combination, and I've had it for years, but I just couldn't find it in time for the photo. As a reminder, this was done under controlled conditions, so there was no risk to the rifle or me. Due to the difference in overall case length, the middle cartridge has been transformed into practically a straight wall case with the neck blown almost all the way out. Looking closely, there is a slight curl at the very end of the case where the shoulder of the .30-06 cartridge would start. In fact, It almost looks like an all-brass rimless 410 shotgun shell. There are other examples of this concept, such as 40 Smith & Wesson or 357 SIG in a 10mm chamber, that aren't generally dangerous, but can still cause problems. Of course, there are also potentially disastrous combinations, such as 30-06 in a 270 Winchester, 300 Blackout in a 223 Remington, 40 Smith & Wesson in a 357 SIG, and others. While these combinations shouldn't be able to chamber, it has been known to happen, the result usually being damage to the firearm and all too often the shooter as well. In closing, always make sure the ammunition being used is correct for the firearm. There's no need to take unnecessary chances in life. The necessary ones are bad enough.
Hello.
Did you say hello?
No, I said hello, but that's close enough.
That about wraps up this segment. If you have any questions for me or suggestions for future segments or a comment on a past segment, please post them on the Assorted Calibers Podcast Facebook or MeWe pages, and Aaron or Weer'd will make sure I get them. I'm also a contributor on the Blue Collar Prepping blog, which can be found at bluecollarprepping.blogspot.com. We're always looking for people interested in submitting posts to the blog, so please check out the site. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. I'm David, and this is Gun Lovers and Other Strangers.
Oh man, I'm actually kind of surprised that that 300 Win Mag will fire in a 300 Weathery Mag. I guess they're close enough. I actually don't know what the parent cases are on those. They might be both 375 H&H Magnum. They're both belted mags, but yeah, that's that is what not to do. A couple other cartridges that haven't been noted is David briefly touched on the 300 Blackout in a 5.56, and I have put the our friends from Geeks, Gadgets, and Guns LFD Research, where they actually chambered and fired a 300 Blackout in a 5.56 gun, and the results were absolutely catastrophic. Though the round did clear the barrel, it was stretched right out, but it did.
Was that deliberate or accidental?
That was absolutely deliberate. Yep. No, they shot it with a high-speed camera. It was a bunch. It was a gun that they had cobbled together from cheap parts, so that it was not a huge loss. They were not destroying a perfectly good firearm, but they wanted to show, because there was enough people that said, "Oh, you say be very, very careful to mark your 300 Blackout mags versus your 5.56 mags, lest you mix them up." Someone points out, 300 Blackout, it can't possibly chamber in a 5.56. And it absolutely can, and they absolutely did. And yeah, so again, if you're someone who has both 300 Blackout guns and 5.56 guns, figure out some way to make it so that you will not confuse those two magazines ever. Another one that I saw a ton in like the early 2000s was somebody accidentally running 9mm through a 40 Smith & Wesson gun, and they will run surprisingly well. They won't cycle, but the round will chamber and will fire. And
yeah, I was doing the math in my head, and I'm pretty sure that 40 caliber is more or less 10mm, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm looking at that, and it's like, that ought to work. I mean, at the very least, it won't blow up your gun. May not be great terminal ballistics, but it ought to work.
My understanding is that one of the key factors is that the extractor holds the cartridge up against the breech face so that the firing pin can make good contact.
Okay, those are all words, but I can't visualize the point you're trying to make.
So if you were to just drop a 9mm into a 40 Smith & Wesson chamber, the 9mm would sink out of sight. And if you were to just if you were to drop it into the barrel, like Martin Riggs in Lethal Weapon, and then shut the slide and then pull the trigger, you would not likely get the gun to fire unless you maybe pointed it straight up in the air. Even then, maybe not, because the round might not be centered on the breech face. But if you feed the round from the magazine in there, the rim will likely hop up against the extractor, and that will supply enough tension that will be pressed hard against the breech face. So when that firing pin comes out, it will still impact enough force to detonate that primer.
Okay, thank you. I understood all of that.
Awesome. Another one was I was actually shooting sporting clays at my club, and one of the shooters was a lady shooter who had elected and she was a little willowy thing. She had elected, because of her size, to shoot a 20 gauge instead of a 12. And she got up to shoot. She called for her bird, and she was swinging through the target and pulled the trigger, and it went pop. And it was very clearly like the sound of a squib load. And everyone went, okay, stop. And opened up the action, had a look. Well, okay, everything looks fine, I guess. And all that. They made sure the barrel wasn't obstructed and they could see light through the barrel, and said, okay, well, there must have been no powder on that. And since it's a shotgun, the shot just kind of dumped out the end. Tried it again and pop. And went, okay, let's see what the heck's going on here. And they realized that we would while we were changing stages, people would put there was shotgun racks all along the back line, and people would set the shotguns in the rack. And she picked up someone who had the exact identical model of shotgun as hers, but in 12 gauge. And how the club works is, because of where we are, they're only allowed to shoot steel shot outside, and so part of your fee to enter into the sporting clays is to buy a box of steel shot, and so everyone holds on to their own box of ammo. And so she had her box of 20 gauge with her. She picked up a 12 gauge, and it absolutely chambered and fired out of a 12, but because there was absolutely no back pressure behind that shell whatsoever, it mostly just pooped the powder out on the ground, as well as all of the contents of the shell. So yeah, be careful. Another one that popped into my mind was, this was on a gun board. Someone had a Makarov pistol and was like, well, it's 9x18. Jeez, that's just 1 millimeter shy of the 9x19 for our 9mm Luger. Geez, you'd think it would just be easy just to ream it out just a little bit. And for those that don't know, first up, 9mm Makarov is Soviet 9mm, and clearly they measure in arshins or something, because it is like, the 9mm Makarov is a noticeably wider bullet than your 9mm pistol and all of the other various 9mm family guns, like 357 Sig and 38 Super and 9x21 Dillon and et cetera. This one is a fatter cartridge, so a 9mm would not be stabilized by a 9mm Makarov bullet. And two, Makarov pistols are really a step above 380 and not real, and much more than a step down from 9mm. And so a straight blowback gun not straight blowback gun like a Makarov pistol firing 9x19 might be a bit dangerous.
Okay, so I want to follow up on something you said. The Arshin, it's an obsolete Soviet or Russian unit of measurement. I don't remember the last time they used them. They use meters and centimeters and things like that now, but you made it sound like it was the equivalent of inches, and no. The Arshin is basically the Russian cubit, and it's 28 inches. So it's more than a foot, less than a yard.
Wasn't it supposed to be a man's pace?
I'm not sure. Let me Google that. I think it was based upon some sort of biometric of the SAR.
Okay.
I don't know, because the traditional cubit was measured from the tip of the middle finger to the back of the elbow. And I think it was based upon It's either King David or King Solomon, one of those. And so I thought that it was based upon, like, Peter the Great or something. It was standardized by Peter the Great in the 18th century to measure exactly 28 English inches. I'm not really sure why he settled on that, but he did. And prior to that, it had basically been in use since the 16th century.
And I believe it was picked up by the Ottoman Turks. And and evidently the word means arm, thus corresponds to a yard. So that's, and who knows how they standardized it on a human on a human standardized form of measurement. But yes, I'd use that just because it was an obscure Russian measurement, and I do know that the M9130 rifle is the sights are graduating in yards, at least the ones that I have. So I've got to assume it was before 1930 was when they replaced the arshin as the unit of measurement and switched over to not yards but meters. Excuse me.
Yes, I have it here in front of me. 21 July 1925 is when the Soviet Union adopted the metric system.
Okay.
And I've got an interesting graphic here, and it's in Russian, which I can't read it, but I know certain things. And it looks like the arshin is measured, it's an outstretched arm, so it's measured from the tip of your finger to your armpit or shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's interesting.
Yes. But yeah, I don't know what form of measurement the Russians were doing for the 9mm Makarov. Obviously that's cool. I'll put that in the show notes. What cartridges were measured at is very, very interesting because of course you've got the 30 Tokarev cartridge and the 30 Nagant, which are both, were both, pistol cartridges. One was for the Nagant revolver, one was for the Tokarev pistol, and the Nagant revolver is, and of course you've got 7.62 by 39 and 7.62 by 54R. The Nagant, the 7.62 by 39 and the 7.62 by 54R are 311 in their bullet diameter. So essentially the same diameter as a 32 ACP. And actually you can shoot 32 ACP in a Nagant revolver. You might need, I've seen people with switch out cylinders. I think you can also just do it in a pinch if you really wanted to. But they're essentially 32 caliber, even though they call it 30, very similar to 30 Super Carry, which is actually the same diameter as well. But the 30 Tokarev is actually 308 caliber because it's based off of the 30 Borchardt and then 30 Mauser. So it's a legacy cartridge from further west.
Okay, so I'm going to continue to geek out about this because I've got it in front of me and I find this interesting. Okay, you thought that the arshin was based off of a stride, and you're close, and I completely understand the confusion because I didn't know about this. So the arshin, which is, the Russian yard, is 71.12 centimeters, or 2 1/3 feet. There is, however, another unit of measurement, translated, I may be butchering the pronunciation, but it looks like it's the shag, whatever, which is the stride, which is approximately 71 centimeters. So the difference between a shag and an arshin is 0.12 centimeters.
Okay.
So that explains why you thought that, you weren't crazy. It was just, wow, we've got two units that are very, very close. Why we have this little extra bit at the end? Don't know. Just because I find this interesting, and that's really all that we need. I am going to post this in the show notes so that the handful of you who find this interesting can click and geek out on it, because I'm a big fan of really odd units of measure. like furlongs and hogsheads and things like that. And, well, hey, this is that, but in Russian. So go and check it out for yourself.
Yeah, just check out the cool picture because it's kind of I can't remember what the name of the picture, that famous Da Vinci portrait of a man and all the anatomical motions of the human body. But it's kind of like that, except there's a Cossack in the middle.
It's called Vitruvian Man.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. It's accompanied by notes based on the work of the Roman architect Vitruvius. That's why.
Okay.
But yes, I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm absolutely blown away by the work of Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, he's really. I've seen a couple of his paintings actually in person, and they're astounding. Really, really breathtaking. And then just like that Vitruvian Man is just, when you'll just look at it, like he's just got all the angles and the right states. And I think there was a copy of that put on the gold disc on Voyager, which I 100% stand for, because it's one of those like, yeah, until you suddenly realize that, there's also pictures of people that don't have multiple arms. So hopefully they'll do the math that there isn't a subspecies that is just got multiple limbs and it just a destroyer of worlds. And I've run out of things to talk about.
Well, that's a first. Make a note. Well, I think it only remains for us to thank our patrons.
Yes. Thanks to each and every one of our listeners, and a very special thanks to all our supporters on Patreon. If you want to, you can become a Patreon patron by going to patreon.com/AssortedCaliberspodcast and signing up. You get cool things like early release of the podcast, plus there's bonus content. We've got blooper reels. They're a delight. Let's just say there's some free ones offered on the website. Go check them out. Also, the ACP film tracks, where we're doing a whole bunch of James Bond movies now, and the ACP Mag Dump.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends, both online and off.
I got a blog. It's called Weir'dWorld.com. I'm also on Handgun Radio. It's on the Firearms Radio Network.
And you can find me at Linktree/Aaron Paulette.
And you're listening to the music of Nate Spencer.
Well, Weer'd doesn't know his arshin from his elbow, and I do. Our units of measurement are assorted, and so's our podcast. Do svidaniya, everybody.
Good night, everybody.